The new Pope's American.
Yeah.
From the Midwest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know him?
A little bit. We grew up about a 25-minute drive from each other. So I grew up in Western Springs. He grew up in Dalton, which is just off the south side of the city. I was in the southwest suburbs, where he's about 4 years older than I am. So we're around the same age. He would have come of age as an Augustinian, which meant he was in the order side of things. I came of age as a diocesan priest. So we didn't really share an educational background. I came to know him a little bit at the last two synods. So the last 2 Octobers under Pope Francis, we had these synods, a gathering of about 400 people, 300 bishops, about 100 lay people, to talk about a lot of important issues. So for 2 Octobers, the current Pope and I were both at the synod. So in that capacity, I saw him. I talked to him a couple of times. He's a very quiet man, very kind of reserved. We talked a little bit about Chicago, a shared background there. I was never at a table with him at the synod, but I know someone who was, and he said he was by far the quietest guy at the table, which I thought was interesting.
Good sign.
Yeah. He intervened. We all had a chance, I think, once or twice to speak to the plenary session. And he spoke, I remember, in Spanish. I frankly don't recall what he said. But so I had a little contact with him, but I don't know him that well.
What changes do you think he'll make?
I don't know, is my honest answer. So far, he's made some interesting gestures, I think. The fact that he appeared on the loggia with what we call the mozzetta and the elaborate stole, traditional garb for the newly elected Pope. Francis eschewed that famously. So this Pope, brought it back. He's used Latin a lot more, which is kind of interesting. I don't know. And
what does that mean that he used? What significance would you ascribe to that?
I think it was a gesture toward more traditional Catholics. Francis would have seen it as a gesture toward, poverty and simplicity. And I think this current Pope would see it as what he did, a gesture toward the more traditionally minded Catholics that like, the liturgy and so on. The use of Latin and all that. Those are little indicators. They say he's going to move back into the Apostolic Palace. Francis famously moved into the guest house, which is, I stayed there one time during a conference, and it's, it's like a 3-star hotel. So he lived, pretty simply. They say that it was harder to protect him there, which I get. The palace is easier to protect the Pope. But this current Pope, they say, is going to move back in. So there are little gestures, perhaps, but I don't think we know. The one thing we know would be the name, Leo XIV. The name is always a giveaway. And he said it was indeed in tribute to Leo XIII, who was one of the most consequential popes. And we mentioned already the St. Michael's prayer.
That he had a vision that the 20th century would be controlled by Satan.
Would belong to the devil. But he's also the father of the modern Catholic social teaching tradition, beginning with his famous letter called Rerum Novarum, which means about the new things. And that's a very interesting letter, Rerum Novarum.
What does he say?
Well, among many others, fierce opposition to socialism, fierce defense of private property, zero truck with Marxism. That's very clear. And by that time, Marxism was kind of a coming thing by the late 19th century. So very clear on that. On the other hand, it's the first great ecclesial gesture toward unions, that labor unions were good. But it also invoked a principle that goes back to Aquinas, but behind Aquinas, it goes back to the Church Fathers and the Bible, which is called the universal destination of goods. And what that means is, since the whole world belongs to God, ultimately, right? God makes the whole world from nothing. It belongs to God. It doesn't belong to us. We are stewards of it, to use biblical language, right? So Leo said, everyone has a right to private ownership, private property. I own this house or whatever. But when it comes to the use of what we own, he said, once the requirements of necessity and propriety have been met in your own life, everything else you own belongs to the poor. That's Leo XIII. That's a pretty strong statement. So private property, yep, you got a right to it. But is your life basically okay in necessity, propriety, Yeah, I'm doing all right. Well, then everything else you have belongs to the poor. That the common good should be your primary preoccupation. It was Ambrose of Milan who said, if you've got 2 shirts in your closet, one belongs to you, the other belongs to the man who has no shirt.
Here's the facts of life you may not learn until you're older, but I'm going to tell you now. It's very hard to have a good time if you're wearing bad boots. In fact, it may be impossible, and that's why you need Tecovas. As a matter of fact, you don't just need them, you owe them to yourself. Tecovas makes Western boots for everybody, ranchers, real ranchers, lifelong cowboys, first-time boot buyers, and anyone in between. Every Tecovas boot is handcrafted, made by hand, with over 200 meticulous steps for a broken-in feel right out of the box. You don't have to compromise between looks and quality. You can have them both. Whether it's a long day or a big night, Tecovas are built to last and impressed. You wouldn't believe the compliments people here get when they wear them out, which they do. Right now, get 10% off at tecovas.com/Tucker when you sign up for email and text alerts. That's 10% off at Tecova, TECOVAS.com/Tucker.
So that's the tradition. And that goes back to the Hebrew prophets, right? It goes back to Amos and Isaiah and those people. So that's what that letter is about. And it's echoed by all the popes coming up through the 20th century, including up to Francis, the idea of the universal destination of goods. So it's against socialism, against Marxism. We like the market economy. That's a basic principle of Catholic social teaching. We like the market economy. But we're not laissez-faire, anything goes, make as much money as you want, sort of capitalists.
Opposed to accumulation of wealth for its own sake?
Well, you know what Catholic social teaching, I'll put it positively, what it likes is a wide distribution of wealth and power throughout a society. It doesn't like hyper concentrations of wealth and power.
Communist!
No, see, that's the thing, is it's fiercely anti-communistic.
Well, because the communist system always winds up with a hyper-concentration of wealth and power.
Right. And the church would never recommend that the government should be the agent of that distribution.
Right.
It would encourage, mediating institutions and all this sort of thing. Read someone like Tolkien or Lewis in the 20th century, and you'll find echoes of that sort of sensibility. Look at it in The Lord of the Rings, where when power gets concentrated, it's always something bad.
Yes.
And Tolkien likes the Shire. He likes the small businesses and small homes and all that. That's reflective of Catholic social teaching.
Me too.
So I think it's intriguing that this man took the name Leo XIV, clearly in homage.
Where was Leo XIII on loaning money to interest, which is the basis of the modern economy in the West?
The church has been against it for time immemorial. Now, the transition that took place was once we kind of understand the dynamics of a market economy better, what it tends to mean now is, loaning at exorbitant interest or loaning in a way that's deeply abusive toward others. It doesn't mean that in itself it's intrinsically evil, because then the capitalist thing.
So how would the church feel about like a credit card that charges 25% interest?
Yeah, it would be wary of it. It would want some kind of regulation and some kind of oversight of those things.
Prison.
John Paul II would say the economy needs to be regulated morally and legally. So there should be a moral regulation. And see, that comes from the churches. It comes from a clear teaching about the moral life and care for the poor and so on. But also a legal regulation to some degree. The best statement of it, I think, is John Paul II. It's called Centesimus Annus, written in 1991 on the Centesimus Annus, the 100th year of Rerum Novarum. That's the clearest expression, I think, of the balance of Catholic social teaching. I think this man is signaling that he likes that tradition.
And what did he say about usury?
He didn't talk about usury specifically, but he has a paragraph where he says, do we support the market economy? If by that you mean one that encourages entrepreneurship, that is based upon private property, that allows even for a profit motive, and he goes through various things, the answer is yes. If by that you mean one that is completely unregulated, legally or morally, one that exploits the poor, one that excludes most people from participation in it, then the answer is no. And so he kind of sets the parameters for how we think about the economy.
Is that, that feels, I'm so grateful to the Catholic Church for standing up for life, for opposing killing.
Yeah.
Truly grateful, and for emphasizing the poor. I think someone needs to. I'm grateful that the Catholic Church has never stopped doing that. But I don't hear any conversation ever from normal Catholic clerics about, hey, maybe you shouldn't, exploit people in business.
We should, though. That's part of our social teaching. And that's part of where the instruction should come from, is the pulpit. Has that broken down generally in our society? Probably. But that's part of the church's job is to preach that clearly. And that's where, that's people like Dorothy Day, the founders of the Catholic worker movement, would come in, these sort of more radical voices. But, sometimes you have to shout to get people's attention. And I think Dorothy Day is a good example of someone that she reverenced the Catholic social teaching tradition, but she felt that in certain ways it had been so ignored that she needed to shout.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.